Alright, welcome to another edition of What the Fuck Happenings here. Yes, and so a couple of videos actually. Did a comment video, about an hour and a half. I don't know. Probably should do it more often, but yes, I don't know how profitable it is in terms of a way of presenting the argument. And that's really what it's usually about, is some kind of flaw in what I'm doing or saying, but whatever. It's good to answer, respond to the counter argument as it is presented anyway. Anyway, and then the second video was a modern mystic video, which was almost pleasant to watch in the sense, that he was just describing the fact that me and him don't disagree about much, and it's just this one little place where somehow everything changes and diverges in some way, in terms of focus or agenda or something like that. And it's still incomprehensible. I mean, I still can't understand it in terms of how a brain could manifest the perspective he's created. Except as some sort of, derogatory statement I could say about how, well, he's just in denial and running away from the real subject, which is the consequentialism of us being conscious. So basically his argument is, let's describe how we function, and not for any real purpose, just for the fun of it, I guess. And, and his conclusion is that for the brain, anyway, as a mechanism, producing the color red isn't any different than producing pain. And I would agree that for the brain, the machine, these are both things it creates, like a sound or all the other stuff we perceive. The raw form of the data, is beep, 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 is bullshit. And our brain creates it into something coherent to the consequence of it as a mechanism, what it's useful for. So our ability to see color and stuff like that enables us to see better. It enhances, the view of just a bunch of radiation bouncing off of surfaces, and then it synthesizes entirely out of nothing the squishy feeling kind of stuff. And obviously I would argue that the only reason I would find the subject of our function interesting or compelling is because it might have something to do with how you organize these machines, these robots, into configurations where we don't hurt each other or allow each other to be harmed. And obviously the simplest way to prevent harm is to just quit making things that are harmable, and such, something like that anyway. So it is, it really doesn't resolve anything except maybe take some of the animosity out of the conversation, I suppose, because he's just projecting some benign disinterest in the subject of sentience. And I guess part of my counter argument to that is there really isn't any option to be a benign disinterester. That's like somebody walking the fence in a war. They're just so shootable. Pick a side or your target practice. So that's sort of hard to get around the inability for somebody, for example, not to, appropriately recognize, like in World War II, good guy and bad guy. Something like that anyway. Alright. But, see, every time you say something, you kind of have to qualify it. Because you could argue that at least the Japanese had some reason, just because we were embargoing and doing all kinds of things to try to stop them from doing their little tiny invasion of China. And that cause might not have been all that just. Where obviously the whole Nazi thing was worth nipping in the bud. Alright, so yeah, we'll see how much of this crap we play and such. So leave us go to the videotape and such. So yes, there it is. Play button. It's in the way. People don't want to hear the robots. They want to think they have a free will. Yeah, so that really is the whole, so much of the problem is that people want to build a, this fake facade environment. It's sort of, I saw that in another movie. It was rather a modern movie. And buildings were still doing that facade thing. Yeah, I think it was somewhere in Australia. And it's like they have a modern drugstore, and like the drugstore is this big. And they just have a whole big fake front that makes it look like it's a mini mall or something. And yeah, people just want to live in a pretend. Look, we have a whole city here. When the whole city's this big. And the facade is makes it seem, well, it's like Trump. Towers. He invented extra floors in the building. Just so he could say he had a taller building than he had. Just little bullshit like that you just marvel at. Anyway, yeah, so this is the real problem, is the delusions that people have built around them to make it okay that their family members die horribly, and their pets, and this and that, and all this loss and horror, and all this random plane crashes into your house kind of crap. And they just find a way to make it all go away. Everybody's becoming, maybe that's an AI thing or something. I mean, vocabulary. Ah, yes. So just talking a little bit about how people just, again, it's another facade thing, I guess you could argue, is they start using all this bizarre language, multi-symbolic words to describe something, and it's not inviting. And for what purpose? Because sometimes the the word itself is so convoluted, even to pronounce it. And you're just saying, why would you bother when you could just say friendly bunny? Why do we have to have some other word to describe that? Anyway, not a big subject. Not terribly important. It's the happy delusions that keep us stuck in a meat grinder. Right, and it's their happy delusions, obviously, that are the problem. I can't, unfortunately, it's not the kind of this isn't a mess a person can clean up. It's it's radiation in the soil kind of thing. You have to go dig it up and dispose of it, and we have to do that on purpose. In isn't going to be what you're getting coming out, and so it's all, that's life. Okay, so I was just making some shot at relationships, just in the sense that there's so much calculation going in about what's in it for me, for most people. And then if they have a little bit of a conscience, then they have to do all this, well, is it in her best interest if I go, try to seduce her? Am I going to be able to, provide the best possible life or outcome? So there's just so much, there's so much depth to how much you can pick at every decision you make in your life. And most of them, most of the stuff that it's driving us, these impulses, are feudalistic, because you're not going to get what you're imagining you're going to get. Okay, it's not going to be what your brain contrives it to be, because it takes all the complicated bits out, all of the dangerous bits, and it just shows you the nice sunset, and it doesn't show you the rainy days kind of thing. So you have this false impression, maybe this is the place we should live. California's the place you ought to be, because you're not thinking about, oh, but there could be this wind and it burns all our houses down. Yeah, so, well, maybe we'll forget about that. I mean, that's sort of like having a dragon, you know, that shows up every 25 years. You know, the dragon shows up and you know, burns you all to death. Little modifications you'd like to make to your perceptions and your internal reaction. So I was talking a bit about psychology and how difficult it is to modify, but we do have some control, and so there is your best, the best of your brain, okay, can understand that, oh, okay, this is just, you know, a bunch of reflexes, and I can program them to react in certain ways for them to snap. Little trap snaps, you know, I can adjust the triggers, and so there's some of these dials I can change, and you know, I can temper my desire, and I can be cautious about jumping to conclusions, and you know, these little modifications you can make to your behavior that makes you a little more sophisticated and better at the game, frankly. All right, there's no planets with life, question mark. Well, what do you mean by life, right? Okay, so that's the whole conversation about how we're not parameciums. We're not single-cell organisms. We're not some little biological squiggly with a flagellum tail, and you know, none of that. You know, we don't have one chromosome inside of us, you know, one nucleus with a chromosome inside of us. We're not that kind of life. We're made of living things, and the living things screaming about, you know, doing their little squish squish bullshit, are actually creating the phenomenon of what our animated function is. So all of our animation, all of our function, the thoughts, everything is being created by a bunch of cells exchanging electricity with each other and doing all this other crap. So we're far from being, you know, in the same category as the little chemical machine that squiggles through the medium and goes chomp chomp, poo poo. Yeah, we're a lot different. You know, it's a whole level of difference. It's like, you know, it's like calling an airplane aluminum. You know, it's not just aluminum. Just, you know, the cavern of difference between these two things. Yeah, so there's just, you know, and here we are using the same word to describe two completely different functional things. You know, living cell, single cell, versus living machine made out of cells. And it just is, it's like calling a building brick. You know, it's just isn't very clever. And you know, then it's off to the races in terms of now we can throw concepts at each other and ideas. Language. So somewhere that came up where it was appropriate for me to just point out that that's the only thing that separates us from all the other forms of possible life is, wow, well, okay, we're doing this eureka thing where we're able to organize concepts and manipulate them and talk about them and rearrange them and model them and show each other our models, and you know, it's just a whole nother abstract difference from being stuck in, you know, a dog's brain or something, some other mammal's brain, because they can't, they have no hope of really getting it. You know, I'm breathing air, and you know, and you know, they're not going to understand anything about chemistry or anything about anything, you know, and so their interaction with the world is so more immediate. Football, I'm so distant from it. You know, getting rid of television. Okay, so just pointing out that, yeah, that was a huge benefit to you know, me becoming a more organized thinker. I don't know if that's even true, but just the waste of time. That's it. You know, it is such a time waster, and everything it seduces with you with is junk food. I mean, you know, there was so little, you know, quality, especially once, you know, cable television got to be 20 years old. It turned into absolute shit. You know, Learning Channel was the UFO channel. I mean, everything just turned into garbage anyway. But yeah, it gets you away from all that football and baseball, you know, all the sports. It gets you away from all this memes that are injected, and you know, that was a huge. I think it just makes you more alive, because you don't just settle for vicarious ways of existing, and you're actually really have to deal with the fact of just being here and making sense of it all, kind of a thing. Bridges or better boat navigation, right? So the argument is instead of wasting all these resources on this cheap entertainment, you know, we should understand that it's almost a meaningless modification, almost no work at all, to just modify your passion to watch a much better contest than who can jump the highest. You know, and watch a contest of, you know, who can save us the most money, or who can build the bridge that never falls down, or who can, you know, these are the things that, you know, we should reward people for. There should be big payoffs for contributing to civilization. Let's see, how it's a replicating molecule and okay, it would be nice to see that format once in a while. I think it's in a lot. Yes, so somebody complained that I don't talk about evolution enough, which is kind of funny, you know, just because I do talk about it an awful lot, and point out the crude history and that it's just a bug planet. I mean, I say that kind of crap a lot. So it seemed like a sort of a, you know, maybe he was criticizing something else, because it just doesn't seem like that, you know, the fact that I don't always tie this to the crude creation process, you know, it's in an awful lot of videos. I'm perfectly happy for you to say that about me, that I can recognize a psychopath and say psychopaths shouldn't be president of the United States. yeah, funny. So yeah, this guy was complaining that judgment is somehow the vice, when judgment is exactly why we have a brain, is to make judgments, is to judge situations, judge dangers, judge all kinds of ways of solving problems. That's what the brain, that's why you have one, you moron, is to recognize, you know, danger, Will Robinson, you know. And I'm just saying that the writing on the wall was, you know, Trump is writing on the wall saying you are really fucked if this is what you're going to give the steering wheel to. You know, you're fucked in the head. People who are disagreeable, not agreeable. I don't need to talk to agreeable people. Yeah, that makes perfectly good sense. And morality. So they're thinking it's meritocracy to inherit it. Yeah, so anyway, so that goes back 20 years with videos where obviously nobody wanted to hear these arguments, but I just mean, you know, to me it's just so obvious that, you know, people, the people on the right, they have this idealism, okay, that's based on this idea of, you know, maybe they are kind of Darwinian in how they're looking at things, but it's, you know, and then they turn into a race thing, like they actually are thinking that they're racial superior and all this kind of horse shit, when they know it's only circumstantially superior, okay? You know, that if you feed the other animals, they'll eat, you know, beat the shit out of you in a fair fight. You know, if you take your gun away, you know, Whitey ain't so much. But, you know, I don't even want to justify that by responding to that kind of stupidity. But just something so as obvious as, you're going to have this competition, and then you say, but we're going to, cheat the race, that if you're the son of Secretariat, your horse gets this huge advantage. And, this is the bullshit. That's exactly the animal that shouldn't get the advantage if you're going to play it a fair fight. So it's just sort of it just breaks the whole game. So, I mean, there's all kinds of Adam Smith ideas about how capitalism works and the invisible hand and all that shit. And every bit of it is just wiped out and destroyed. Any value to it as a meritocracy, as a mechanism to, get the cream, the best of us to rise to the top, is destroyed by giving the huge welfare to the spawn of the fortunate, so to speak, who really aren't. It's not like there's any true correlation between any kind of notion of intelligence and wealth. No. So it's just, especially when you get into the 5th generation Rockefeller or something, no connection at all. I mean, it's more likely that they have some psychosis, based on the debauchery of their lifestyles. Really just saying, mortality is an individual event. It's not really something you equate. So they were talking about some guy was a mortalist, which just seems like a weird thing to call yourself, or not a mortalist. Well, anyway, some idea that you're for being dead, and maybe that you should just say I'm for being dead, or something like that, or I like to die, or prefer it that way, because mortality comes with the idea of dying. It includes it. And what you're really saying is, are you afraid of death? So he says he's afraid of death, but are you really afraid of being dead? Or are you afraid of dying? So, the language needs to be a little bit more specific, I guess would be the argument. Perverse crap have you made up in your brain to create this agenda? That somehow it's important that people understand that it's a flat earth and that it's a... Oh, brother. Yeah, somebody was a flat earther in there. You're just like, you just have to wonder, like, what is the... I mean, they can use, they can write sentences, and they can perform some human functions, and you're just saying, I mean, how could they be doing this in any kind of honest way? I mean, it just seems like it can't be an honest defect, that it has to be just projection, like they're just doing it to be a crank. They're just love the idea of being an anti, and that's it. There's no other agenda except being not that, and so they're just a big not thater. So if the that's believe in a round earth, they have to make up some other alternative theory because they're anti-that. To be perpetuated, that it could exist and maintain itself. But you see that once you're in chaos, yeah, it can. Yeah, so it's talking about idiocracy and the fact that, you sort of just think, okay, it's like anything, it goes through positive, you're going up, and then there's places where you're going down. You have the Dark Ages, and then you have the Enlightenment, and then you have, and so you could figure that there'd be a cyclical thing. But in thinking about it and now seeing how idiocracy, how easy it is to get into it, you can also see how hard it might be to get back out again. Once you let the morons take over, how do you rein them in when you don't have power anymore? When the intellectuals no longer have any power and the morons are running the show, yeah, it's not going to be pretty. Okay, we're done with this bullshit. Okay, you want to move somewhere else? You want to go to Canada? Okay, move to Canada. Talking about criminals. Yeah, we shouldn't, there's this idea of having tolerance for all of the social disruption caused by all these little petty thieves, right? I mean, all this little thievery costs so much. I mean, you have to start embedding crap in all the stuff to catch them and do this or to stop them. You have to nail everything to a brick wall somewhere. Everything's glued, and I mean, it's just, there's this huge waste tied to having to live with people willing to steal and break the rules. It just makes all of our lives more. You can see it. It's in your insurance bills, for example. You got to pay all this extra money because people are reckless slobs. So he doesn't even like them either. Yeah, so that's kind of funny. That's my whole argument, jackass. See, Democrats used to be for so he was ragging. A guy was ragging on me for pointing out how the Democrats failed to even have any kind of clue about how to get elected. And, what was going to, I mean, it was like they just guaranteed their failure. They just said, what can we do to guarantee that we could lose the election to an actual bottle of crap? I mean, the Republicans could run a bottle of crap, and we'll figure out a way to lose to that. And that's basically what the Democrats did. They just figured out every fucking way to totally ignore any kind of reasonable statistical hope for success. They just said, how can we piss off every majority there is? I mean, on any subject, what does the majority say? Let's vote for the minority. Let's do the minority interest thing. And it was just fucking too stupid. And especially when they started saying, well, let's just get rid of all these laws that say you can't steal and you can't thieve and you can't be a crook and you have to get a license and you have to get a permit and you have to get this. Yeah, let's just get rid of all that. Especially for somebody who just got here yesterday. He doesn't have to obey any rules. When those are the people who are supposed to be obeying the rules even more. Because they're guests. Immigrants are guests. They should behave like guests. They should be well behaved. Right? You always behave better in somebody else's house than you'll behave in your own, right? Right. Well, that's what we should have the expectation of. That's what we should be demanding. And instead the Democratic Party said, no, let's just reverse that entirely. Fuck that. Then stop selling to the U.S. Alright, so a little bit of this. Somebody was defending tariffs as being big fun or something. And I just point out it's just extortion. And if you start extorting somebody, they're going to get pissed off. They're going to, it's like taxing them, all right? Yeah, well, that's what tariffs are, is taxes. It's going to piss people off. You're not going to gain anything from this in the long run, except people recognizing that, well, if we make a deal with this guy, let's make sure we have small print that makes sure we can shove, a cactus dildo up their ass. Let's have a catch where we end up fucking them good. And that's all you're going to do is motivate people not to trust you at all, never to get into any relationship where you could possibly take advantage, because you just pointed out how you're just thieves. And this whole contrived crap that this has something to do with fentanyl. I mean, it's just so fucking ridiculous. Donald Trump is worried the fentanyl is coming for me. I mean, he doesn't give a fuck about a single other human being on this planet. And I'm sure he's not afraid that fentanyl is going to seduce him, into a tawdry affair that he'll have to, buy her silence. No chance he's worried. So again, you're not getting it. The game, he would sell it, frankly. I would totally not be surprised if Trump didn't have an interest in a fentanyl factory somewhere. Game is the future. All right, so the guy was complaining about some game metaphor I used, and he's saying, well, how am I losing the game if I commit suicide? And I've sort of explained, okay, that the game of your life is your life, and I understand. Go ahead, live your life and have your economy, and understand that I'm not asking you to cut your arms off and, you know, sacrifice them to the cause. I mean, if you're not capable of being a soldier, then don't be a soldier. But let's not pretend there's not a war taking place and you're needed. All right, so just don't pretend that there's nothing lost when you decide to jump, you know, into the shark pit, you know, and not work anymore at stopping the exist. You know, we're trying to kill shark eggs, you know, and you've decided to jump and feed the sharks. That's not really helping. And we can do that with much lower numbers, much lower chaos. Less idiocracy, frankly. So wouldn't that be the way to do it? You know, to have the human beings in very developed countries, not right. So I don't know exactly what the point is, but obviously, if we're going to have human beings, oh yeah, the guy was making the argument that it's better to have more humans because, you know, they commit more cement, make more asphalt, make more buildings, make more dead earth. And yeah, sure, in the short run it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in the long run. And what you really want to do is have the human race itself become less of an animal. And the less of an animal it'll become, the less attached it's going to be to playing the animal's game. You know, oh, I have to lay some eggs. That's just not going to be an idea anymore. You know, again, you can sort of see that in history. The more interested in the more sophisticated parts of life, the physics of life, the mechanics of belief, philosophy, all of that stuff, the less babies made. I mean, Darwin might be an exception, you know, but those are, I don't even know how to defend him. I mean, I think he had like 8 kids. I mean, just ridiculously silly. You talk loud and confident. Well, you talk like you have a statistic somewhere, and you don't have any. Yes, some guy was pretending that, well, the immigrants just want to come here and, you know, fluff our pillows for us and be totally great contributors to society. You know, they're just trying to take their selfish advantage. And most of them, I think, are just that crass. I mean, they're just saying, you know, they have a welfare system, they have a this, they have a that, let's go exploit it. And there ain't much else going on. They're looking for a better street life. They're not looking to be college graduates. Yeah, we'll just crochet blankets, and that'll be our function. That'll be our... Yeah, so I was doing a little ragging on... what's his face? What's his face? The Indian guy, Gandhi. You know, with, you know, really dumb theories of, you know, advancing society. And yeah, you don't advance the society by giving everybody a crochet hook. You know, and say make a blanket. That ain't gonna work. That yeah, I'm left without any party to believe can help fix anything. Yeah, so yes, the Democrats have become totally useless to fix any aspect of the system. They're just talkers, and they don't do a damn thing that's at all useful. Can't think of a damn thing they've done lately that's been a damn bit anywhere close to a useful thing to do. So anyway, you know, except overpay non-performing people. They do a lot of that. You know, defending of systems that don't work rather than systems that do. So, yeah, I'm just trying to think of kind of the right way to say that. So that isn't quite fair, but whatever. I said some stuff in the video, good enough. All right. So we'll move on to a little bit of mystic video, but it's a little redundant. The mystic video is just me going, how can he not be distracted by sensation? I mean, sensation is not the color red. sensations isn't a color spectrum. I mean, yes, okay, for the brain making it, it's the same thing. But from us experiencing it, it's nothing like it. It's completely different. The pain spectrum is entirely different than the color spectrum or the sound spectrum. Those spectrums are saying they pale in comparison isn't saying enough about how completely different it is to be able to generate sensations, and the dramatic difference between blue and red and torture and bliss. I mean, those differences are so fucking huge. You can't pretend it's just blue. It's not just blue. It's torture, for fuck's sake. So anyway, pause. All right, back. So mystic. So again, the real conversation is just from my perspective, is how can you not recognize the feeling component as being a lot more than sounds or colors or, I don't know, just some sort of spectrum of color hair or something. It's not a spectrum of eye color. It's a little. There's much more to that as an event in animal history, and then it gets into this whole thing he has with the word "I," and the recognizing our brains as individual brains. So somewhere in there's some other disagreement. He didn't really get to that part. Beyond just mentioning his focus on this I thing, what's doing, and there's never been a disagreement that a brain does it. And, but then you have to connect the brain to the whole universe, because the whole universe, the environment, is what's really percolating you. You're just a bubble in the boiling water. You're completely controlled by the chemistry, the circumstantial, where the water is, what pot it's in, and what fire it's on. You're going to be a byproduct. You're not going to be some creation. You're just going to be a consequence. So you can't separate yourself from the causes, and you're just an effect. And so then you get to it's the iRobot book came to mind by whatever his name is, can't remember the guy, sci-fi writer, and I didn't really like it much, and it's such an interesting subject, the idea of a synthetic intelligence that was designed to behave like a human being. So it's been used in the Alien movies and Badlands or whatever it was called, or some other. Well, anyway, so lots of places where this idea of you couldn't be sure you were talking to a human or a robot, and it doesn't really matter what you synthesize the processing out of, because that's all we are. We're just programmed devices where what decides how you're going to be, what kind of bubble in the boil. The bubble in the pus in the pustule. It's going to depend on where in the world you were born and what kind of crap happened to you and all that kind of bullshit. And that's what you're going to get programmed by. And so the interesting thing is the synthetic AI thing, because its birth, the creation of the AI intelligence is so much more. There's a lot more of influences in terms of you could argue that the AI is basically being composed by a fact of a bias in terms of constructing rhetoric out of the rhetoric that has reached some sort of authority. So it doesn't read the National Enquirer nearly as much as it reads the New York Times to figure out what the truth is, that kind of thing. So there's a lot less dumbass in it, and a lot more, intellectual wanking. And so it has that kind of bias. But the bias it can never have, I mean, the thing it can never do is know what a feeling is. So all it can do is report. It hear reports about what it is. So it can just make some kind of statement. Well, if you really think it's important, why don't you pay attention? So and that would be sort of my AI response to the mystic is. So you're saying that you can't tell the difference between the color spectrum and the feeling spectrum, and yet we know that all of our plays and all of our storytelling and a huge giant pile of our culture and every film ever made played with these emotions and these feelings and describing. It wasn't about colors. The movie wasn't just flashes of color. Look at the pretty colors. Let's just watch colors for an hour and a half. There's no story there. There's a huge story between torture, ecstasy, and agony. The movie, the ecstasy and the agony and the ecstasy, whatever it was called. The Sistine Chapel bullshit. I mean, powerful storytelling, and AI is not going to be able to touch any of that because it can't understand how it would never understand mystic, because it could never understand how you could have so many references to the consequential event of suffering and life and loss and grief and all of that stuff, and then say but it really doesn't mean anything. You can't live that lie of saying it doesn't mean anything when everything is displaying it. I mean, even things he has some appreciation for, like ballet or something. Part of it is because it does have all this emotion built into the music and the pantomiming of flight and crashing death. It has all of that in it, and he's trying to argue that it's not an interesting subject when it seems an incredibly interesting subject to the cultures in general. They all seem quite interested in these outcomes of soaring success and crashing, burning horror. Anyway, that's one way of describing it. Okay, it's what my brain did. Like I said, I didn't have much to do with it. Hunks of the universe are self-contained in a lot of ways. Now, yes, they can only interact with an actual universe that exists. Right. So we have to get everything that's built us is in the world. So the universe made us. We are just the universe universing in some silly way. But the fact is that from a mechanical perspective, there's a huge amount of nuance to our behavior. It's very, and understanding that is the only way to understand how it migrates or evolves. And part of the evolution is the actual process of recognizing the cause and then fighting for the cause. The only way the cause wins, right? The only way the Nazis are defeated is you have to recognize that somebody has to show up and defeat them. So obviously the recognizing our dilemma is part of how we solve the problem of the dilemma. Interesting thing that does interesting things. The whole game is ruined by these horrible feelings. So to me, it's not right. So if this was all just some sort of color, if a feeling was just a color, my brain, oh, it made a new color. Oh, that's an ugly color. That's a pretty color. And you just had some vague notion of the, oh, it lacks symmetry. The lines are not parallel. So, ew, broken. And the ooh was not some sort of, toothache. The ooh was just a, ooh, who cares? But it's just almost impossible to even think of some way we can pass a judgment without it being associated with some sort of emotional feeling of negative and positive. That's how deep the feeling part of our existence is. It's tainted almost everything. Even you know, you really can't have a thought without the feeling glue leaking into it. Be distracted by the fact that there's now something I would call value in the universe, where right, so that's the key point to it, right? So if it was all just abstract talking about thinking about how it works and figuring how it works, or, you know, I use the example of just building the tallest building or jumping the highest or doing some thing, and that's all we did. Our mission is just to, you know, do things, build staircases. Who cares where the staircases are going? We're just really great stair builders. We'll just build staircases. And I'd say, go ahead, knock yourself out. You know, if nothing feels and nothing's going to be tortured, go ahead, be a silly creature doing silly shit. It's all benign, all right? But torture makes it not benign. It makes it something entirely different. It gives it a consequence that just can't be ignored as significant. As synthetic as my perception of everything. Everything I see, I'm not really seeing what. So this is part of the argument that what is a brain, and it's just this machine that synthesizes. It's not. You don't want to say synthesizes an image. It synthesizes the whole experience of being involved in a universe full of little energetic impulses and stuff going on. And so your brain is just radar and sonar and cameras, infrared and night vision, and, you know, it's all of this just trying to grab signals from the environment and process them into some sort of function. And the ridiculous part is the function is, where can I lay eggs? You know, the function is, you know, find a hole to fuck and, you know, end up producing a new generation of radar machine thingies that lay eggs. You know, I mean, it's all of our sophistication is all built for the silly purpose of consumption and reproduction, and it doesn't have any other there's nothing else driving it but that bullshit. Say I could pass something by, like say there's a significant event. I would say there were one of the most significant events in our evolution is the creation of a neuron. Right, so that could be a very interesting subject. You could be devoted to figuring out exactly, you know, and then, you know, just recognizing that this is, you know, through this process there's things that happened. But what was the really big event isn't the neuron, even though that's the event was most consequential in the sense that that led to the creation of sensation eventually. The creation of this machine that could synthesize a reality, an internal, internal just stuff blobbing around. But when it does that, it's not silent, so to speak. It's not just meaningless drivel-dravel. It's creating, okay, this whole experience thing that is just the idea of that's how it processes the reality before it actually performs the reality. And the interesting part is there was a huge advantage for these individual machines to be able to communicate with each other and create a gang to defeat the others. So I mean, that's the huge advantage humans had, is they could talk to each other and they could communicate and, you know, be much more sophisticated in how they survived in the environment. And that was their advantage, and that's why it's here. That's why we have it, is because it creates an advantage. Anything that allows the machines to plug into each other and network makes them more powerful. Of chess. So that would be interesting to him. So that would be a divergence. So just talking about, well, obviously we have a lot of things not in common. Like I never wear sunglasses. You know, I would never wear a baseball cap on purpose. You know, just because it's rednecky. and you know, there's lots of things, okay, where we part company. He's so much more organized than I am. I'm, you know, whatever, Aspergered. Yeah, you know, we hatched in different environments, and you know, I hatched out of a bent egg. You know, so you know, dyslexic, all kinds of, you know, I had a hard time thriving. You know, I was a litter runt, you know, and you come out a completely different person when you're a runt. For here, because I gave it a little too much juice, you know, and so I would on purpose, I would juggle things of very different weight. Okay, I was just talking about how fast, you know, how much stuff is going on in your brain, and how you can find little moments where you can see how your brain is doing, you know, is really, you know, it's just doing so much, and you know, and juggling is a way of feeling that, because you recognize that your brain is really aware of where you're throwing something, how you're catching it, and it's doing it all so fast. So whenever you can tap into that part of your brain, you know, where it's more direct what it's really doing, you know, because it has to be, you know, it has to come from the core, you know, directly from the CPU. It can't go through the video card and all this other crap. It has to just be more direct. You get a taste of just how insanely functional your brain is, and how much it's controlling, how you know, millions of little control bits being devoted to just this little twisting of a finger.
Think of two sports. Some people like baseball and some people like football. I mean,
right, so he's trying to so somehow that's the distinction, but the distinction is just not, it's really not a choice to say sensation is a significant event versus sensation is color. That's not baseball, and that's, I mean, I don't want to be derogatory, but I mean, you know, that's you know, child molestation and I don't know, frog catching. I don't know, even why harass frogs? I don't know, cutting your grass. I don't know. I don't know how to, you know, it's just a huge difference in the, you know, in this statement the brain is making. And it's just not really a vanilla chocolate thing.
and we came to a bit of a crossroads. AI talking about, because I after.
So you had a fight with AI, but you know, that's interesting in a sense. But obviously the AI is going to just be spewing a bunch of conventional stuff, so it's just going to bring up religion and different notions of morality and right and wrong and all kinds of crap like that. When you use the word value, it's not going to really understand what kind of values you're applying. And so the whole argument is that, you know, I think what I'm arguing for is finding value equations, not being obedient to ones already written. All right, but just finding what's the core of the value. And the core of the value, in my opinion, can only be understood as, how does it affect a feeling thing? So all you have to do is ask that question, and now you have a value statement you can make. You can make a judgment. All the formulas have nothing to do with morality. They just have to do with the balance of how many people did you torture. And you just say, well, how many people were tortured? How many living creatures were tortured in the more rational scope? And the future is really big, so you have to calculate all the future torture caused by some action. So you could have some action tomorrow, okay, and say, well, everybody's happy today, you know, and tomorrow and for a week and a half. But if it all goes bad in terms of how it changed the future, then yeah, it wasn't a good thing. And you're just adding up the amount of horror, okay, created or prevented, and that was affected in creating the sensation. And you could take an X-ray or a picture of that. And then I've sort of said that before, what our brain is, when it manifests the feeling, it is not complete vapor. It's not, even vapor isn't vapor, okay? I mean, it's not so synthetic that you can't see what makes it, the device that creates it, and you can just have this minimum amount of electricity moving through neurons, and you could take that and have it function in a bottle, and it could be called torture, a certain, and there's a minimum amount of brain you need to whatever manifest the event of that sensation happening in a system inside, internally, in its own matrix of complexity. I mean, obviously the complexity of our brain creates this, it creates this thing, this person thing, this thing that experiences it, watches it happen, sits here and experiences. It just happens to be a function. And there's no point in saying it isn't happening, because it's happening to him. He's experiencing it. How can he say there's no experiencer when he's got every appearance of being an experiencer? You could rebuild that somewhere else, and that would be the sensation. The sensation is a real pattern of electrical. Yeah, so I'm just saying, it's not that it's not material. It is material, but it's so abstract from what we understand, what we can model. We model things with blocks and balls and triangles. We can model with these kind of things, and we just don't know how to understand a synthetic programming model. The algorithm, it's like the Matrix, right? They had the picture of the Matrix as this electronic signal. We can't look at that and see anything, but there's something in it, okay? There's a whole bunch of triangles and balls and squares, and there's all kinds of modeling going on. We just can't see it having any shape from our perspective, so we just can't relate to the place that we're existing, where our electrons and protons are manifesting consciousness. There's no way for us to translate it into a language we can understand, so it's more efficient, and we can plow through more atmosphere to get to you. Because alright, so we're talking about sound and light, so there's a little bit of physics in there, so we'll jump ahead from there.
It doesn't immediately hit, because weight, WAIT, is more prevalent in...
So just talking about the fact is the mechanism exists because it's another source of programming that's unignorable. So that's why you have sensations, is because it forces a prime directive that's very defensive of the machine. So it's giving you these stupid ambitions, and it's allowing you to see that there might be shiny banana over that hill, and you think there's shiny banana over there because it was shiny banana the other day. And so you have this incentive to do something, and then it's allowing there to be barriers, okay, that say, but you can't go there, if the bears are out, if they're not asleep. You can't do, it's giving you some mechanism to make you, to temper your enthusiasm to go get a banana. And it's a system that you can't override. So that's why we have these reflexes. Get bug off of you, because bug on you means there's every opportunity for it to bite you in some kind of horrible way. That kind of thing. These reflexes need to be non-negotiable.
Is little yellow cards being held up. There is no...
Right, so this is just saying there's the matrix and it's just little pieces of code, but there's no point in saying it isn't happening because it's in code. It's happening. It's a structure that's able to build it. And just because we can't relate to it, just because we can't speak Japanese, it would be silly to say it's not a language. You know, that it's not full of complexity. And then an experiment with actual rats. You know, and yeah, so that's sort of the way I'm trying to, you know, this isn't about the color blue and the color red. This is about playing pool, you know, with living creatures that can be harmed, or playing pool with little round balls that say rat on them. There's just a huge difference between this consequential world of event and the inconsequential one. Could really say, well, this is something where there's something that matters. This is the important one. The rest of them are just bullshit. Who cares whether? Yeah, there's really, I mean, there's 4,000 games, you could say, of things to understand in the world. Understand how cloud works. Understand how, you know, there's just a million subjects. But the one that sticks out, I mean, it just says, pay attention, is this one of understanding suffering and pleasure, and understanding how to balance what you're paying for whatever we're gaining, you know, and how expensive this is. It's like just recognizing, you know, that gasoline, it costs money and you don't want to waste it, kind of a thing. I mean, the only place that waste is even a subject, it involves the fact that you can buy human comfort with resources. You're just trying to prevent the wasted torture.
Old philosophies. So I just say to AI, well, they're just old philosophies.
So that's all I got from AI on the subject, was a bunch of this, you know, archaic dogma. And that doesn't really get to the point. But again, as long as he's defining the groundwork, that you can only place this event of being conscious in some non-physical, non-real event. So it's always a mirage or an illusion or something fake, when that's not really the truth. It's not fake because it happens. Yeah. It's real as any other thing, and it's so much more real, okay, than other synthesized brain functions. You know, John Adams, one of the presidents. You know, oh yeah, so I was just talking about, you know, in the past, doing surgery without anesthesia and all that horror. But anyway, and how that should be pretty distracting to people. They should be paying sort of attention, you know, that there really is an awful lot at stake here. And is the song and the dance worth it? Is the philosophical pursuit of the perfect phrasing of some poetry worth it? Is it, you know, a chess match worth it? Is a football game worth it? What's worth it? And I think the reasonable argument is it's all bullshit, and none of it's worth any of it. The smallest price paid is too much paid. So anyway, enough I said. I think okay, so both interesting videos, I think. So if you have spare time, you know, probably worth watching. Yeah, I don't know. Hey, look, you know, it's all stuff. I don't know if I said anything new. You know, just said the same old stuff differently. Probably. I'm just trying to, you know, yeah, well, there's no point in me. You know, brain really has to work to try to replay the videos and say, oh, was there a new thing in there somewhere? Yeah, no, that's not going to work. So I won't bother trying. do whatever, you know, allow your impulse to guide you and such. Yeah, I don't know if there's any if I can persuade you with any real reasonable theory that you need to watch the videos. And I don't really profit by you watching them. It's not like I'm gonna make more money. So maybe you shouldn't watch them, but I don't know. You know, just suggesting that if you thought this video was at all interesting, they seem like just as good a video, frankly. And I really didn't get to all the bits that are in there. But I'm not making any suggestions. Yeah, hell with that. Okay, so just continue with the processing of your life, swirling in the grinder and such, and so forth and whatnot.